Wildfires fueled by fierce winds and drought erupted in the hills above San Diego in California last night. And that's not white sand, but snow blanketing the beaches of normally sun-kissed Florida. Reminders, if any were needed, of the extreme weather that's become almost commonplace in America, exacerbated, most people agree, by human-induced climate change. Most people, but not the denier-in-chief, President Trump. He was busy playing politics this morning.
You don't have water in the hydrants, you don't have water in the sprinkler systems.
Blaming Democratic officials in California, he claimed, for holding back the water needed to fight the fires to preserve instead a tiny endangered fish which needs the fresh water to survive.
And everyone's trying to figure out why aren't they turning it back. They say it's the Delta smelt, it's a fish, but I find that hard to believe.
California officials say that's just not true, that Trump is seizing on the Delta smelt for political capital. They admit there have been water shortages, but insist no amount of water could have prepared them for the sheer ferocity of the blazes that engulf the region. Just as North Carolina, where Trump was visiting today, says it had no way to prepare for the devastating floods that wiped out entire towns and villages as Hurricane Helene swept inland last September. But it being a state that voted for him for president, Trump's not criticizing them and is again blaming the Democrats for allegedly not doing enough to help.
Well, I don't know if that was for political reasons, because they lost the state. You know, Biden lost the state. Maybe he felt he doesn't care.
There's no doubt that the floods in North Carolina and the fires in California are two examples of weather disasters that have been made far worse by climate change. And yet one of Donald Trump's first moves in office is to try and dismantle Biden's climate agenda, pulling America out of the Paris Climate Agreement, ending ambitious targets for electric vehicles, and recommitting once again to drill, baby, drill. And yet the facts do not change. America is still the world's second biggest polluter. Global temperatures are still rising, and Americans across this country are still suffering as a result.
If the U.S. turns its back on some of the promises of the Paris Climate Agreement, we cannot expect that disasters will just go away on their own. The United States would be contributing to the problem of the very disasters that are affecting people's lives, not only in the United States, but around the world.
Clearly, President Trump isn't going to be moved by that type of language. Instead, his government has just issued a memo immediately halting the development of wind farms and solar projects on federal land. Green energy be damned. Well, Donald Trump has now left North Carolina, the state, remember, as I said there, that voted for him and which he said today would still be in line to receive federal funds as it cleans up from that hurricane disaster. He's on his way now en route to California, a state, of course, that didn't vote for him and that he is threatening today to withhold federal funds from, even as the wildfires continue to burn there. He is due to meet with the state's governor, his political nemesis, Gavin Newsom, just today as new numbers have been released that put the amount of money required to rebuild from those fires at a massive $275 billion. Meanwhile, the March for Life has got underway here in Washington, D.C., the anti-abortion march, that is. A day after Donald Trump pardoned 23 anti-abortion activists, some of whom had aggressively blockaded an abortion clinic. Trump was beamed into the march earlier. He said that those activists had been persecuted, while his Vice President, J.D. Vance, a devout Christian, earlier appeared on stage to address the protesters and said that the task of his new government, his and Donald Trump's new government, would be to make it easier for Americans to have more children. 1 week down, Matt, 4 years to go.
Enjoy. Siobhan there in Washington. While also falling prey to the new president's sweeping cuts this week is his former National Security Advisor, John Bolton. Mr. Trump has revoked his security service protection despite the target on his head from Iran's regime. Well, in a moment, we'll hear from Mr. Bolton. But first, how did he turn from friend to foe? With his hawkish politics and unmissable moustache, John Bolton's career in the US administration had already spanned 2 presidencies by the time George W. Bush brought him to the fore.
So today I've used my constitutional authority to appoint John Bolton to serve as America's ambassador to the United Nations. Congratulations.
A controversial appointment given how critical Bolton had been of the UN, famously suggesting that if its New York headquarters lost 10 stories, it wouldn't make a bit of difference. He lasted 16 months, failing to win confirmation from a Democrat-majority Senate and resigning from Bush's government.
All right, thank you all.
Come on in, folks. Come. After a hiatus, the now 3-time Republican administration veteran returned for a 4th in 2018.
You're going to do a fantastic job, and I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you very much.
A well-known hardliner and the previous advocate for the Iraq War, President Trump's new national security advisor took his fight to the Iranians. A fight that saw the US withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal and culminated in the assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in 2020. Anti-US sentiment across the region grew, and for regime allies, Bolton became enemy number 1. But it wasn't long before he secured that status within the US as well. His criticism of Donald Trump and involvement in his impeachment following the 2020 election saw his swift fall from the grace of the man now once again ruling the country. And then there's the removal of Secret Service protection for Bolton, along with former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and former Iran envoy Brian Hook, despite multiple alleged Iranian assassination plots against them. Good to have you back on the program. Let me start with this rather obvious question. The President Trump, has removed your security detail. Do you think that's an act of retribution?
Yes, I don't think there's any other explanation. The Secret Service protection was re-extended to me. I'd had it when I was at the White House as National Security Advisor, but re-extended because of the Iranian threat. And there were a group of us, former, some current government officials, who were being targeted by the Iranians. It was not anything I had anything to formulate. It was done by the intelligence community. And that threat remains, as of this past weekend, I was told, exactly the same as when I received protection. The same is true for everybody else. This is not just me. And that's proven by the fact that a day or two later, he removed former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's security detail and one other. Look, just purely as a matter of politics, from Trump's point of view, if I or Mike Pompeo or one of the others who are threatened by the Iranians are killed, the blood will be on Trump's hands. What's he going to do to the Iranians then? And what's the political consequence for him and America going to be? You want to think about these things.
So do you feel personally in danger now?
Well, I think the risk is obviously there. If the risk weren't real, the Justice Department, in my case, wouldn't have filed criminal charges against a Revolutionary Guard official who was trying to hire a hitman for the embarrassingly low sum of $300,000 to assassinate me a while back. This is the kind of thing the Iranian government does all over the world. They go after people in Europe. They go after people here in the United States. And it's a measure of just how thoroughly terrorist a state Iran is today. So when they see the U.S. government, in effect, disarming in response to this kind of threat, I think it follows fairly easily that the Iranians are emboldened to do even more.
Do you think the first week of Trump's presidency has sort of set a tone of revenge and retribution, not just against people like you, but his opponents and critics in general?
Well, I think he's well on the way. I think his pardoning of the January 6 demonstrators, including some who committed really atrocious acts of violence, was intended as a signal. It's intended to have an intimidation effect on others. And I think there are other steps that he's been taking. I think this will continue to unfold. I think that's who the man is. I think this is evidence of his real character, or lack thereof.
You work very closely with him. How does he operate? What's his modus operandi when it comes to people around him, people that he relies on for government?
Well, I think as you can tell by the turnover of officials in some of the most important positions, really exceeded any administration in recent American history, that he insists then, but he's even more insistent now, not on what some people call loyalty to him. Loyalty is a virtue; it's a good thing. He wants fealty from his advisors. He wants submission, and he thinks that's good for him. Ironically, it's certainly not going to be good for the country. Ironically, it's not going to be good for him either to be surrounded by a bunch of yes men and yes women.
Of course, he would say, and his defenders would say, and many people who voted for him would say, that all he's really doing is taking on a sclerotic bureaucracy and what he would describe as the deep state.
Look, I have said for decades now, for example, that the State Department needs a cultural revolution. So I'm quite familiar with the bureaucracy. There are ways of doing it and ways of doing it. What Trump is doing really is getting in his own way, because this kind of approach, which is very careless of the secondary effects, I think doesn't achieve what he thinks it will achieve, and will actually build up resistance to what would otherwise be legitimate objectives.
When it comes to to abroad, when it comes to capitals around the world, looking at how to respond to Trump, is there such a thing as a Trump doctrine that has emerged so far?
No, because he doesn't think in philosophical terms, strategic terms, policy terms. He thinks anecdotally, episodically, ad hoc, seen through the prism of what benefits Donald Trump. I said in my book, if you took all of his decisions in the first term, they'd be out there like a big archipelago of dots. You could try to connect one with another if you wanted to. Good luck. He can't even connect them.
Now, what about specific issues like Iran? He talks tough on Iran, but now he's also saying there might be a deal. He was, slightly less tough on Russia in the past, and now he's being tough again against them. There's some inconsistency there. Can you see through all that? Do you detect some kind of pattern?
I think it's fair to say that for Trump, everything is solvable by a deal. Zelensky should have made a deal after Russia invaded. Taiwan should make a deal with China. Whatever the issue is, he'll make a deal. And maybe that works in real estate, but it sure doesn't work in international geopolitics.
John Bolton, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for having me.